welcome to the Resident Engagement Zoom event. Just wanted to welcome you. So my name is Matt Hodges-Long, so I'm the CEO and co-founder of Building Safety Register. And unusually for me, I'm going to actually just say hello to you all tonight and then be quiet, because this resident engagement panel is all about residents, and in the terms of living in an apartment block, I am not a resident, so therefore I do not qualify for having an opinion on this. I certainly do have opinions, but in terms of engaging on the panel, I'm here in the guise of an audience member tonight. So all I really want to do is firstly welcome Gill Kernick and the panel. So Gill is a thought leader in health and safety, culture, learning, leadership, but is also a resident within an apartment block, and she'll tell you her story. So thank you, Gill, for stepping up to chair. And then just really from our perspective, thank you for coming. A lot of you do know what we do, but in case you don't, we run technology that runs building safety logbooks. One of the key points of managing building safety logbooks is that they're very easy to use to share information, key information in real time with residents. So they do, amongst other things, in terms of keeping buildings safe and compliant, they also allow responsible persons, accountable persons, landlords, management companies, whatever you want to call them, to actually invite residents into the world of compliance, so they can actually self-serve looking at their fire risk assessments and insurance policies and whatever it is they need to look at as a part of the engagement process. So that's what we're bringing to it, but it's not about that tonight, it's about residents. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Gill now and put myself on mute, and hope you enjoy the session.
Thanks, Matt, and thanks very much for hosting this. So we'll have the panel introduce themselves in a sec, but if I just introduce myself and give some context. So firstly, I am a leaseholder in Trellick Tower. So I have lived here since 2014. And prior to that, from 2011 to 2014, I rented a private apartment in Grenfell Tower. And on the 14th of June, from my window, watched it burn. I lived on the 21st floor, and 7 of my former neighbors on that floor died in the fire. And then professionally, I am a safety leadership and culture consultant. I work in high hazard industries to prevent catastrophic events happening. And as I watched Grenfell burn, I thought of other major accidents such as Piper Alpha, and promised that I would do whatever I could to make sure we learned lessons and never had something like that happen again. I'm also just about to publish a book. So I've spent the last year writing a book called Catastrophe and Systemic Change: Learning the Lessons from Grenfell Tower Fire and Other Disasters. And then in terms of the history behind this panel, is I'm a firm believer in the voice of the front line as being absolutely critical to safe outcomes. And I want to say that that's not just from a moral perspective, it's because whether it's a resident in a high-rise building or an oil and gas worker on a platform in the North Sea, they have the tacit knowledge, the as-lived experience of how the building works, about how the asset works. And if you don't tap that knowledge, you don't stand a hope of being safe. So when I talk about resident engagement, for me, it's not just this nice moral good thing to do. It's you can't hope to be safe unless you tap the tacit knowledge of those at the front line. In the case of building safety, that is residents of any guise. And then, just context, since Grenfell, the Hackett Review called for residents to be at the heart of building safety reform so that they can be and feel safe in their homes. It recommended a resident engagement strategy, which is in the building safety bill that's currently before Parliament. And really this came from my frustration, not just in the last couple of months, but over the last 4 years, of seeing conversation after conversation, mostly from industry, about residents that didn't include residents. And then I got frustrated about one particular one, and then Matt and I spoke and we said, well, why don't we put together this session, which is essentially residents talking about resident engagement. You know, we could spend days and days and days talking about this, but the intention is really to begin to explore from a resident perspective what's needed to rebuild trust and ensure residents feel safe in their home. So that is the intention. A couple of ground rules. So it's easy. Well, let me share a story. So I went to a resident engagement meeting at Grenfell just when the refurbishment was kicking off. And it was the most combative, aggressive, horrible meeting I think I could imagine. And one of my biggest regrets is I knew something was off and didn't do anything about it from a cultural perspective. So as much as it's easy for residents to get angry and demand stuff and be aggressive, and in many cases, I think we've got a right to and should, I also believe we need to learn how to work together until we can get industry and residents collaborating and working together. We don't have a hope of being safe. So the tone of this conversation is really intended to be conciliatory, inquiry-based, in the interests of learning for all of us that are committed to residents feeling safe in their home. So those, and then I am going to be strict on time. So I've warned my fabulous panel members that they've given me permission just to be strict on time so we get everybody's voices heard, and also so we can get a couple of Q&As in at the end and finish on time. And then finally, this is going to be the tip of the iceberg. So if you walk away from this conversation with more questions than answers, brilliant, we've fulfilled the intent. So we're wanting to open a conversation, not close it down, if that makes sense. So I am now going to ask each of the panel members to introduce themselves, and we'll start with Bob. So if you could introduce yourself and give a bit of your background.
Yes, thank you, Jill, and thank you for Matt for inviting me along. My name is Bob Smitherman. I'm the honorary chairman of the Federation of Private Residence Associations, but I'm also a leaseholder in my own block of flats on the south coast in Worthing in West Sussex, where I've been a director pretty much since I moved in. We were very dissatisfied with our managing agents. I had my arm twisted at the first AGM to become a director of the RMC and took on that responsibility almost 30 years ago. In the last 20 years, we've been self-managing it without the help of an external managing agent. I like to think we do that very well. The residents seem very happy because we're engaged, we communicate well, and part of that's been helped by the FPRA. The FPRA is a national organisation for England and Wales, not the rest of the United Kingdom, but we represent long leaseholders who are RMCs, RTMs, residents associations, both formally recognised by their freeholder and informal residents groupings. We hope to have some more common hold members very soon, because common hold, I think, is the future of getting rid of this ridiculous feudal leasehold system. I suspect we probably won't touch on common hold tonight because this is all about building safety, but actually in terms of resident engagement, it's really important that actually we collaborate with our residents, and what we do at the FPRA for our members is offer unlimited free legal and practical advice, independent of any commercial organisation, for our members, and we've been doing that for the last 50 years, and I'm very proud to be honorary chair. Thank you, Jill.
Wonderful, Bob. Thank you so much. Deepa?
Hi, Jill.
Hi.
Thank you for having me on this panel, and thank you everybody for attending. I'm glad that this has been set up. It's the first of hopefully many. I've struggled with not being able to feel involved as a resident and as a leaseholder. When I do look at other groups, I do see lots of experts on the panels, lots of industry, lots of industry people. Sorry, but not.
You don't have to say sorry about those noises.
The leaseholder down on the ground. So I'm really grateful that this is finally being addressed, and however I can help, I'm happy to do so. My personal situation is that, as you heard, I have 3 children here in a shared ownership flat. We only have 2 bedrooms and it's very, very cramped. We really want to move. We've had our remediation done 3 years ago and we still can't get our EWS. So I'm one of the few that is fortunate enough to feel safe, but at the same time, I don't feel safe. And I don't have, you know, when you don't have a certificate of some kind of comfort, it doesn't really help your anxiety. So yeah, that's my situation. Professionally, I'm a chartered accountant. I have been for 15, nearly 20 years. And hopefully I'm not at risk of bankruptcy and stand to lose my license because of this. Thank you.
Thanks, Deepa. Thanks for sharing that. Paddy.
Hi guys, I am Paddy. I'm the chair of a resident association in Battersea. We're 7 council blocks with 2 high-rises, and I've been here for over 21 years now. We originally set up the resident association to try and work more harmoniously with the council, and a lot of it was around gardening and things like that. But then in 2009 we had a very serious fire in one of our high rises, in fact the block I'm in, a few floors below, and the flat got completely gutted. Luckily everyone was okay, but it really was a warning of just like how vicious these events are, and obviously it pales in significance what happened with Grenfell. But since then I got really interested in looking at how we can improve fire safety in our block, and started looking at things like sprinkler systems. Specifically, what I decided I wanted to try and install was a misting system in my flat. The good news I felt is generally the blocks we have are actually quite safe. We've got outdoor landings and things like that. But then when Grenfell happened, suddenly, you know, it really kicked things off, thinking, right, we've got to try and help do this. Unfortunately, the council took some very drastic decisions very quickly, taking us to tribunals that we'll get into later, and creating a very adversarial situation where we didn't really feel we had any say in how to improve our fire safety ourselves and talk about some of the issues in our specific buildings. And that's kind of where I've been ever since, is just trying to push through for the last 3 years, lots of different ways of advocating misting systems, and also just looking at how to divide up the different risks in a building, to create something that creates a blanket of fire safety that might not just be so simple as just removing cladding or putting sprinklers everywhere. It's more targeted to start with, which seems just a practical way to start. So sorry, that's a bit of a waffle, but that's me.
Great, thanks, Paddy. Sarah?
Hi, everybody. I co-founded a group called CLADAG at Christmas, which is a disability action group for disabled leaseholders who are affected, particularly by the cladding scandal. I'm a wheelchair user myself and live on the 13th floor of my flat in Birmingham, about 13 years. The key things from CLADAG's perspective that we want to raise awareness of is, firstly, naturally evacuation from high-rise buildings and blocks of flats that aren't high-rise. Also, understanding that for everyone it's our home. It's also a financial investment in many cases, but this is potentially, I hate to say it, but a care and health setting for a lot of people too that may have invested. So in my case, you know, I've taken out the bathroom and put a wet room in. I've got a hoist, I've got a specialist toilet, I've got a profile bed, I've got a pressure floor mattress. It's all going on there. So when I see things like, you know, enforcement notices and people being, you know, evacuated for 24 hours or half a night or whatever it is, where do you go if you've got care needs? It's not just a case of sleeping on a friend's sofa or getting a travel lodge or something. So there's no real thought for that. And finally, another area that we're conscious of is the costs of evacuation aids and exploring that. And I was very fortunate that my Right to Manage board were adamant that it would be sorted and just got it sorted, and my neighbours supported that. But we've got members who, unfortunately, because of the financial constraints of certain service charges at the moment, resent the fact that these aids are being put into the service charge, and it's leading to harassment and hate crime and people saying disabled people shouldn't live here. So that's unpleasant. So that's kind of where we are, and hot off the press, we are meeting Lord Greenhalgh on Tuesday. So looking forward to that.
Great, thanks, Sarah. And Tom?
Hi, everyone. So I'm a leaseholder in 2 cities, ended up buying in Birmingham so I didn't lose my job, and my main home's in Manchester. In both situations, the changes in fire safety law have led to the properties being trapped. They've not had the remediation done. In Birmingham, I'm an RTM director. I decided it was more important to kind of get in the driving seat and trying to fix some of these issues than perhaps not being able to be engaged. And to my surprise, I'm about to become an RMC director at my other site as well, because there's been a change in the controllers there. So, I was born on a farm. I'm a country lad, but I'm quite committed to city living. I think it's a pretty cool thing. I just find it completely bizarre, just listening to the stakeholders already, that we've chosen to live in cities, do the right thing, sustainable living. I don't have a car. I ride the train, I ride the bus. I've bought these homes in good faith, and it's kind of backfired. So it'll be interesting to hear how everyone else is getting along as well.
Wonderful, thanks. So just in terms of the format, we'll kind of do a deep dive into one issue with each of the panelists. And as you can hear, there's a real diverse representation. I mean, I think one of the things often is we use this word residents and think it's the single group, but it's really diverse. It's as many people as live anywhere. So we'll do a deep dive into that, and then there's some short questions we'll ask the panelists, and then we'll go into a Q&A. But just before we do that, from a cultural perspective, I think one of my major concerns is it's nearly 4 years since Grenfell, and I'm not quite sure how much cultural change we've seen. So I think people are well-intentioned and people are really busy and they're doing a lot, but have we seen real increased trust? Have we seen increased transparency? Do residents in fact feel safer in their homes today than they did 4 years ago? Do residents feel that their voice has power? Are we openly exploring the kind of narratives that we use to silence residents unintentionally in many cases? For example, we've seen at the Grenfell inquiry the labeling of rebel residents. I hear conversations as the document's too technical to send them. So there's a lot of kind of unquestioned biases and assumptions that create those narratives that lead to residents not experiencing or not having a voice. So I'm going to start going to Bob. And Bob, if you could tell us your thoughts on the desire to improve resident engagement on building safety across your membership of over 500 blocks. Are residents at the heart of building safety reforms?
I like to think certainly our members are, Jill. I'm also very aware, we don't receive any national funding as an organisation, which I think is a tragedy, really. There are lots of, we've been doing some work with Companies House on responsibilities for company directors of what the term is called flat management companies, which incorporates RMCs and RTMs. And I would love to see a world in which all RMC directors let their companies be members of ours, because we've got 50 years experience providing that advice. And I think it's really important where residents can come together, can feel empowered, be confident of the advice and support they're getting, so they can take on the responsibilities, which are not inconsiderable, and they're going to become more over the next weeks and months ahead, as the fire safety bill becomes an act, the building safety bill becomes an act, that there's going to be more and more responsibilities put on those RMC and RTM directors, and I think we're well placed to help and support them. But I'm also very conscious. I say, as you mentioned, we've got 500 member associations, and there are something in the order of in excess of 12,000. Companies House's statistics are a bit vague about how many actual RMCs and RTMs out there. If anyone on the panel can tell me exactly how many flat management companies are out there, I'd love to hear from you. Certainly, some of the work we've done with them is certainly in excess of 12,000. We think actually bringing those people together and supporting people is the best way to do it, and having people to step up and support your neighbours. I think I think it was Sarah said earlier, actually these are our homes. We can't just suddenly go away. We haven't got, many of us haven't got sort of second homes that we can just plod onto. Actually, these are our homes and it's our livelihoods. I've lived in my leasehold flat for 30 years. I absolutely love it. It's brilliant. But the current system of leasehold often makes it very challenging. And doing the work that I've done within the FPRA has actually, shone a real light on how difficult it is for many blocks, particularly when they've got a managing agent or a freeholder that doesn't understand what they're going through, because why would they don't live there. So I think the message for me is, get empowered, get together with your neighbours, form a residents association, seek formal recognition from your freeholder. If you're lucky enough to be in a company situation, step up and become a company director. There is lots of support and help out there. And I'm happy to sort of take any questions from members of the panel. Thank you, Jill.
Right, thanks, Bob. Deepa, as a shared ownership leaseholder that has lived through a cladding remediation project, what are your observations on progress towards resident engagement as envisaged by Dame Judith Hackett? Were you included in decisions? Were they transparent? Did you feel safe?
That's a lot of questions all in one. We were remediated. It was about 4 or 5 weeks after Grenfell, so that was when the scaffolding started to go up. In terms of involvement, there had been none. It was literally you received a letter and then you saw scaffolding, and that was that. When it came to Waking Watch, we had no idea. It was just implemented. When it came to what product was going to be replaced on the building, again, we had no idea. It was just told to us by letter, and that's fine, because a lot of these technical details we as leaseholders don't have the knowledge about. We don't have the understanding. I mean, I do now, after months of researching and understanding this, but back then I didn't really understand it at all. So that really didn't feel so. It didn't feel such a bad thing. I suppose what bothered me more is the lack of involvement in the timelines or the project costs or who's going to be on your site. How do you know that somebody walking around is actually from the contractor company? And the conditions that I suppose we were living in during the time as well, the lack of privacy, the lack of safety afterwards, after hours when everybody had gone home and we were still here having to clean up after them. It was just, I suppose we didn't feel, I personally didn't feel involved in that sense. I don't feel that we've been any more involved since either, although we did as residents together ask for a meeting with the contractor and with the housing association and the project manager to try and understand what was going on, what work was being done. It led to us being given an email address that we could email our queries into, though they were never answered. It led to I'd say probably 4 or 5 project managers being assigned to this project by the housing association, who then didn't have much, I want to choose the right word here. Who didn't have much dedication or commitment, because it was just, let's get this project done and off I go to my next project. So in all, I suppose, in all honesty, the people that I felt closest to from understanding what was really going on in our building were the contractors. And it was only because I, stepped out onto my balcony and spoke to them, or I went down and outside and asked the project manager, what are you doing? What's going on here? It was a unique situation, I suppose, at the time. So it wasn't managed as well as it should be. I don't know how things are being managed now when more buildings are being remediated, but I hope that my housing association have learned from that. The problem now is that even since having been remediated, there hasn't been the next step. So the next step being, we need the EWS. Surely we are safe now, but the fact that we can't get the EWS makes me wonder that we're not safe. And I do wonder if there's more risk to come about. And really what I would appreciate is just some honesty. Don't treat me like I'm a stupid tenant. I'm not. I do have a little bit of knowledge about this, and I've probably understood more technicals than most people. Yeah. So I would like to be spoken to as a human being, and to be told that we understand and we can provide this information for you. I mean, I've asked for several things in the past. For example, I've asked for the O&M manual, at least to have some comfort that that the work that was done 3 years ago has been signed off. And I'm not allowed to see it because this is not the kind of thing that is given to leaseholders. But I don't understand why. I mean, I suppose the Hackett review did suggest that there should be more transparency of information. The fire risk assessment is one of them, so that's fine. I mean, I can get hold of that, but the actual folder that details the safety certificates of the materials on the building I'm living in, I can't see that, and it doesn't seem right to me. But I suppose we have to just continue to engage and persist.
Thank you.
Did I answer all your questions?
You did brilliantly. Okay. Thank you. Paddy, you were instrumental in taking your landlord to the first tier tribunal and winning. What do you think your landlord learned through this process, and has it changed how you are being engaged with?
Hi guys. Thanks for the questions, Jill. Just to quickly set the record straight, the council actually took us to the first tier tribunal, which I'll get into in a minute. And yeah, we managed to defend the leases we had, but it was quite an awkward situation to be put in personally, which I'll get onto in a minute. So yeah, so 7 days after Grenfell, Wandsworth Council had a committee meeting and decided to say they wanted to install sprinklers in all their high-rise blocks, about 100 of them, which sounds great in theory. And two things happened. There was a big public announcement. We're investing £35 million into installing sprinklers everywhere, which all the public see. And then all leaseholders get letters saying we're going to the first tier tribunal to make sure we can charge you all for it and enforce, be able to go into your homes and enforce entry to install these sprinkler systems. So obviously, first of all, there's a bit of a difference between the two events. Thinking, oh great, this is brilliant. There's all this money to help looking at doing stuff, and then suddenly it's like, oh, actually we're doing this to you. You've got no, we'll do the consultation later, but this is happening. And from my point of view, obviously I've been looking at sprinkler systems for over about 7 years previously. Since then, and I had a very specific type of system I was really keen to install, and almost had done pre-Grenfell, till I did a lot of research to suggest actually our buildings are relatively safe. And in fact, the big fire we had even proved the point to an extent that compartmentalisation in our building was okay. But then when I got married and had a wife in as well, the thing with fire safety is it's not just about the building, it's two things, it's the people and the building. And you've all got to think about your own risks. So you know, all those things come together and think, okay, right, I would love to install this sprinkler system. But the way the first tier tribunal case happened was the council, if you actually read the legal text, it's more about protecting the building. So they want to make sure they can enforce installing sprinklers in every single flat 100%, which, you know, in theory, again, is great. No one's got any objections to that principle but it's how do you get there straight off the bat? And now, rather than looking at every building individually, almost like a national building health service, which, you know, you could maybe group them together, but as a whole, taking the 100 high-rise buildings, they are vastly different, with a completely different set of fire safety issues. And so this was a real kind of attempt to just think that this fixes everything. And it does. We've had fires in our communal bins, that smoke percolating up into multiple properties, but there's been no talk about installing sprinklers or water systems in there.
Paddy, just one more minute, yeah. So
okay. So where it is at the moment is I'm actually with a housing ombudsman, because we can't. The council won't say if they will or won't install sprinklers or what the future will be, and I'm still keen to go ahead and do it. One of the questions was, what have the council learnt? And I'd love to say a load of things that they have learnt. Unfortunately, I'm not so sure. The advice from the first tier tribunal when we won the case, which is really to actually you have to look at each building individually, which they could do. They could do that and then and put through cases to start installing. They've dismissed and said we're not doing any of that. I was part of an resident engagement meeting as well that I had to resign from because I was really disappointed with the kind of very closed structures they were building that wasn't giving residents any kind of powerful voice. It was so that was disappointing, but we're still plodding on. I mean, there are hopefully good people at the council, and councillors change and all the rest of it. So, you know, it's an onward journey. But it's just become it starts as a very adversarial situation from going to court and making it a legal process, and it's been a struggle kind of bringing it back around to a more resident focused, people focused, you know, safety focused thing where we could be looking at individual properties and installing these modular systems and gradually getting up to a system where, you know, all houses have them. And it's not just high rises. Most fire deaths we've had, unfortunately, in the borough have all been in low rise buildings since Grenfell. So you know, it's frustrating. The good news is there is these great solutions out there. The frustrating news is, you know, we're a bit behind trying to convince everyone about some of these different ways of managing that risk.
Great, Paddy, thank you. Sorry to cut you short. Okay, great. Sarah, there's been a lot of coverage in the press recently about PEEPs, so personal emergency evacuation plans, and the role of the responsible person in relation to getting involved in the management of safety of disabled and vulnerable residents. What's your perspective on the seeming reluctance of responsible persons to embrace PEEPs, and how does that make you feel? Do you feel safe in your home?
I think there are probably two factors. The first is I think perhaps there's fear and, let's call it, a lack of experience with how to do them. So then that becomes a reluctance to do an evacuation plan. If you've got no experience, you're afraid of doing it. Now, in my case, I was always advised to stay put. And one of the factors, I suppose, that influenced that was, at the time, I had access to a firefighting lift. It turns out there are issues with the construction of that lift, so I can no one can use the firefighting lift. So then it became clear that this stay put plan probably was not something I'd want to do, actually. And I was really fortunate that my RTM board, who, full disclosure, one of which sat right there, hello Tom, no pressure, no duress here, but they were very happy for me to explore a PEEP, you know, and that was great. But that's not the case that for everybody else I know. No disabled people I know has one. So I think it's largely to do with people being afraid of doing it. I also think that I'm afraid to say there's a lot of othering going on. And I keep reading that stay put is the right thing to do. It's like the realistic thing to do. It's the practical thing to do. Whereas actually, it's systematic prejudice that our lives are of less value. I've heard experts say disabled people are quite happy to accept and understand they have additional risk. No, actually, I'm not willing to accept that. It's not true. And 1 in 5 of this country are disabled. Flats are a very economical and affordable way to live, particularly if you've got mobility problems, and like, you know, a bungalow, which is way out of my price range. So I really think that it's quite easy, it's quite simple. All we're asking is for that we explore the possibility of a plan. That doesn't mean you have to get everybody, you know, have to get the person out. It just means explore what is available. In my case, I have a 24-hour care team. We have an evacuation chair. We train my PAs. I'm out. But that was never a possibility before because we never explored it. I was never advised of those options. I was told it was totally impractical because people don't have care teams. I do. So why couldn't we do it? So I think that we probably ought to follow the spirit of the Equality Act, which asks for reasonable adjustments. It doesn't say everyone gets access to every service in a full way. It says to a reasonable level. So why can't we explore evacuation plans with an objective reasonableness test?
That's great, thank you. Tom, as both a resident in your block and a director of the RTM company, what are your views and experiences in relation to managing resident engagement on building safety? And what do you think are the key challenges?
So I think where I'm not a director, it's really difficult to communicate because I'm kind of second guessing, middleman in between, trying to piece together bits of information. And where I am an RTM director, it's the exact opposite. I've got all the information, but there's absolutely loads of stakeholders to communicate with, and that's leasehold renters, the housing association we've got in the block, the corporate landlord in the block, the commercial units, the owner occupiers, the shared owners. Like, there's a whole raft of people who are looking at it from different perspectives. I think what makes it really challenging is that things aren't static. So, you know, we might have talked to Sarah about her own plan 2 years ago, but actually because of information we've learned since, the plan needs to be materially different. So you communicate one set of information and then the law changes, or certain stakeholders, maybe the fire service, won't sign off on certain strategies, or the insurers aren't happy with something. So it's not like it's a static feast where you can just go, here's the plan and we're going to stick to it. And I think the real challenge is everything's moving at such a great pace now around the legislation reform, but it's kind of going back to front. So the laws have changed and the requirements have come in, but the solutions to help us get out of this haven't yet come into force. And so there's an element of, you know, I'm asking my neighbours to trust in me that I'm going to do the right things to potentially get us out of what is a very difficult and dangerous situation. But I haven't got all the answers. So it would be far easier for me to be able to communicate and say, this is what's going to happen. On this date, we're going to find out about the grant. And on this date, the insurers will say they're happy and all that good stuff. You know, I've got my crystal ball out and we're doing our best to manage all the risk and keep the stakeholders happy. But with an uncertain future, you know, people are being asked to put their faith in what are effectively volunteer directors like myself. And that's a real challenge.
Right, thanks, Tom. So we're going to do a couple of kind of short questions and then move on to Q&As from the chat. So the first one, which I'm going to ask Bob, Sarah and Deepa to briefly answer, is what is one practical change, either in behavior or attitude, that you would like to see from your building managers or owners that would improve resident engagement? Let's start with Deepa.
Hi.
Hi.
I think if I'm not just looking at remediation, but I'm looking at my general interaction with my housing association, one thing that I would love to see is some sort of log. When I say that, I mean a log that we as residents can access. Particularly when we are raising maintenance issues, we want to see the updates on those, where they are, you know, what's changed, what needs to be done, that sort of thing. I think that would be very useful, just as a way of keeping us updated, because otherwise it means that me and 19 other leaseholders in this block are calling the housing association and spending upwards of half an hour on the phone, which is quite a lot of time when you have to do it every few days to find out what's happening with, say, our smoke ventilation system stopped working and is still not working. Our parking gates are not secure. Our post boxes have been broken into. You know, simple things like that have very simple fixes. It would certainly take away a lot of the stress and give me a lot more faith that it's being followed up and it's being done, rather than calling up again and hearing, you know, having to go through the same explanation. I've logged this already. This is how many days we've been told it will take, etc., etc. And we seem to do that far too often, and it's such a waste of time. And I'll bet it's probably a waste of the housing association's time. You know, the call centres to have to log all of this, just to have some sort of web-based register that we can log into and monitor and see, and then if it needs to be chased up, we can go and chase it up. Something like that. Right. I think would be wonderful. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Deepa. Okay, and if Sarah could answer the same question, and please keep it really short because we want to give time for some panel questions.
No surprise, I'm fortunate. I'm okay, so it's not to my management, but it would be evacuation plans. And what I mean by that is a regular survey of people living in the building, because needs change. Somebody mentioned the chat, absolutely. 83% of us acquire our disabilities, only 70% are born with our impairments. So it is likely that we will become disabled. So things change. So regular survey, and then not just going, okay, noted, stay put. Actually have a conversation. It may well be something very simple like, do you know what, those people on your floor, you don't know them that well, but it turns out they'd be more than happy for two of them to just be backup buddies to help you down the stairs and knock on your door as the alarm goes up. That's all. That's a plan. That's better than nothing at all. So that would be mine.
That's great, Sarah. Thank you. And Bob?
Yeah, thanks, Jill. I think that both those two examples are really simple things that can be done by a good managing agent. And I think it's really important that, you know, if you're talking about a commercial managing agent, actually they should be doing those sort of things and they should be communicating. So I think the one thing for me is, by default, it should be a lot easier for residents to come together and form a residents association where they can work together in a democratic way to actually hold their managing agent to account. So they're delivering those services, because there's all that sort of technology out there. If you're a member of the FPRA, for example, we've just teamed up with an organisation called Manage Your Block. And it's got all those systems in place. It's free of charge for FPRA members. And actually all those facilities are there. And it's a bespoke, you know, digital, you know, management service. So those facilities are out there. So I think by default, every single leasehold block should have a residents association. I think that's really, really important. And that's whether that's a resident run volunteer RMCs like Tom's and like my own, or whether that's a block where the freeholder appoints a managing agent. Actually, the residents association should be able to hold them to account, and I think that should be done by default. Thanks, Jill.
Brilliant, thanks. And then for Patty and Tom, what is one practical piece of advice you would give to residents that don't feel safe, don't have access to the information they need, and don't feel at the heart of building safety? And I will start with Patty.
Hi, Jill. Yeah, thanks. I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I would suggest looking at misting sprinklers if anyone, has a feeling of being unsafe. But also, it's good to look at your building specifically and identify what issues you might have other than the big glaring issues with cladding. I mean, I just wanted to actually respond to the other question you had, because it's what you mentioned at the very beginning about biases. The way the council has treated its leaseholders and tenants in its blocks, it would never dream of for the private residents in the borough. It's the sort of set of and the fact that the politicians get quite involved in issues of fire safety rather than people who are fire safety experts. So they bring all these different biases to the table and are often the ones making the decisions. So actually it's a way of trying to separate that out a bit. So we're getting more evidence-based
great
opinion.
Great.
Yeah, thank you.
Great, thanks, Paddy. And then Tom?
I know the question says one thing, I'm going to say two. The first is tap into resources. I can see people in the chat putting various comments and adding things. There are so many resources out there to help one another. I'm hearing the speakers, I'm looking at the people on this call. We can all help one another. I think if you're struggling to get information from an agent, for example, I guess I would challenge you to try and find some common ground. So, maybe there's a fear factor on their side. Maybe they're worried they're going to get loads of people come knocking on the door asking questions they can't answer. And maybe you can find someone to be the conduit to try and help be the middle person between the two parties and try and extract that information in a way that isn't confrontational.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to move to a couple of questions from the chat, which in full transparency Matt has helped me with because I wanted to be with people, not be looking at the chat. So I'm going to, Tom, go back to you for a second. Will resident engagement activity inflate our service charges even further? So any thoughts from you on service charges? And
I mean, it all depends, isn't it? If there's work needs doing, then work needs doing. The risk is if the residents aren't engaged with the building owner and there's something needs sorting, and it can be sorted now and it's going to cost £10,000 and it can be sorted in 10 years time and it's going to cost £1 million, maybe it's better to get it sorted now. But I mean, the one thing I would say, the importance of residents engagement is being in the driving seat. There's nothing worse than feeling like that everything is happening to you and you've got absolutely no control. There will come a point where you can't control everything. There are things that you cannot influence, but getting closer to what some of the issues are and being able to, the thing we've started doing here in Manchester, we've just found out that the building owner is going to be moving on. There's going to be an RMC taking over. And we just sat down as leaseholders and went, okay, what's our strategy? What are the most important things to us? Which order do we want to do them in? So all of a sudden you're going from marching someone else's tune to trying to decide, even if we haven't got the funds, even if we haven't got the resources, what are the important things to us to move forward?
Great, thanks. Any other panel members, anything quick to add to that in terms of costs of resident engagement activity? Doesn't have to be. Bob, was that you?
Yeah.
I can only see Buckingham Palace behind you,
sorry,
not your hands.
No, I just totally agree with Tom. I think the more you can come together and communicate with your neighbours, the better. One of the things we did in my block, when we got rid of our managing agent, I got structural engineering. We produced a plan of what needed doing, and we budgeted for it over a 20-year period. 20 years on, we've now completed everything. It wasn't all completely on time, but actually we were able to communicate with the residents that they knew over that period that flat roofs had to be replaced. They were £70,000 each. We've got 9 of those. Well, clearly, if we just done what a lot of managing agents do, where they just say, right, you're all having a flat roof done, here's your section 20, off you go. We said, actually, no, we're not going to do that. Actually, we're going to do it over time. And we managed to, regularly assess every year the state of the roofs, and we managed to get all of them done without anyone having water piling into their properties. So it's communication. Get together with your neighbours and be open and transparent. So that's it from me.
Great. Which takes me to the next question, which is, why is the assumption that how residents are communicated will be in text? So my experience as a resident is mostly by letter. are other forms of communication, speech, you know, actually talking to people being explored. So just any comments, and Deepa, I think I'm going to come to you on this one. So any thoughts on how we're communicated with?
Oh, I find that it's very archaic, you know, sending letters. We now have been receiving emails every so often, but it's not the standardized way of doing things. Phone calls probably would help, but when you have to deal with many people in a block, I think an email is probably the way to go. Or like I said, a register, which people can access and get their updates. One thing I do want to raise is that, you know, when it came to us being told that we don't have an EWS and can't sell, it was only raised when we asked to start the resales process. So again, there's you know, clearly nobody else in my block had any idea that this was going on. So, you know, this is just an example of where letters, emails, you know, there is much room for improvement there.
Yeah, great. Anybody else in terms of how you're communicated with?
Yeah, I would like to make the point about accessibility of communications as well. Right. What's the point of a letter if you're blind? And we need to think about perhaps using technology. Also, if you experience mental health problems and anxiety, receiving a pack of letters is not a way to effectively communicate with somebody.
You're making me smile, Sarah, because I've spent, as a director, hours and hours writing briefs and board updates that are really long and detailed, and they get down on paper and they probably land with half the people. But the best feedback we've had when we've issued invoices for tens of thousands of pounds, which was, you know, startling, then held a Zoom call and talked about it all together. And that was the best interaction. People could like kick it around and like on the chat now, answer each other's questions. You know, if you can facilitate that engagement, I think it's really important.
Excellent. So I want to turn to some different question. What resident engagement strategies have you seen working well? There's silence. Oh, I didn't call on anybody. So anybody from the panel, what resident engagement strategies have you seen working well? Paddy, sorry, Deepa go, and then Paddy, I'll come to you.
I'll quickly add, when I'd first moved into this building, we had a neighbourhood manager, and the neighbourhood manager visited the building once a week just to do an inspection. Every so often we would have a sit down with this person and be able to just see what's going on. That has since been taken away, and probably to have something face to face, I know COVID times do not allow at the moment, but when we are allowed, I think the personal interaction really does help.
Great.
Thank you.
Paddy,
I was just going to say, at the moment, the focus, especially around fire safety, has also been sheltered accommodation. So the councils are cracking on with looking at installing things like sprinklers. And our neighbouring council did I felt a very successful resident engagement in their sheltered accommodation, where they're showing them the different systems and really getting their feedback. And from what I've heard, they have actually installed the misting systems I've been banging on about, and the residents are happy. So that felt like it's gone well, compared to just letters and this is happening to you. You know, it does require a bit more extra effort of getting people in and discussing and talking. We've had the same effect with, you know, there are lots of residents who are very anti having things like sprinklers and put in their buildings, but when you do mention the misting systems again, you know, they kind of go, oh well, we'd be all right with that. Then it's all just comes down to cost. Yeah.
So I'm going to start bringing it to a close. I mean, I'm so fascinated. I could dive into any of these in much more detail. I'm going to answer one question that's directed at me, is in terms of great practice in other walks of life. So from my perspective, I think people have kind of alluded to this, and what I'm left with listening to the conversation is the power of residents, which is completely consistent with my experience. Empowered residents are just the most beautiful, I don't know, force of life, and it's just phenomenal listening to the conversations. But a lot if I'm working with organizations, we create champions, but we train them and we give them the time to be champions for the voices of the front line. And I often think about, like people do surveys, the local authorities, whatever, come and the housing associations come and they get some external company to come and do some stark survey that, in my opinion, doesn't really lead to much learning. And I often go, well, why don't you pay residents to do surveys, train them and pay them to actually go and listen to their neighbours and put together a report that gives feedback and, give them the resources to really champion safety and the accountability and power to do so, because a lot of what you hear, I mean, Tom, in some of the stuff that you were talking about, is there is a power dynamic. So as a leaseholder, I'm much safer speaking up than if I'm a council tenant, because they can't really kick me out if I'm, so there's all of these power dynamics at play. So I think there's a lot that you can do, but it's more for me about the questions about how do you really tap this tacit knowledge. It's phenomenal, and the power of residents is phenomenal, but I don't think it's being used, and I think it could be being used in a much more strategic way to enable us all to be safe, because right now it's residents tend to be doing it on their own because they're not getting what they need from the people that they manage. So we are going to draw it to a close. Matt, I'm going to see if there's anything you want to say. We are going to send out a recording, and I believe there's phenomenal stuff in the chat. So again, just reiterating how much community support and knowledge there is there. So Matt, is it possible for us to also get that in some way sent out to people or accessible? The stuff that's in the chat.
We will do our best, Jill. And also, I need to apologise to anybody that's watching this on the video, because I clicked on the wrong button, which means that halfway through the discussion, everything moves around. So I consider myself, I've been allowed to drive the desk, which is wrong. I should have got Alyssa to do it. But all I want to say is just a quick thank you to everybody. Thank you to all the panelists, to you, Jill, for chairing, letting me have the evening off. And for everybody that's contributed to the chat and has come this evening. I mean, I looked at the numbers and pretty much everybody stayed for the whole hour, so that's fantastic. I think it's good to draw it to a close. I know Nikki would like an extra hour, she just put in the chat, but we'll probably end up doing that on the phone one-to-one. So all I'd like to say is, look forward to the next event. We don't know what it's going to be yet. If anybody wants to email or contact us with ideas of what we think we should be talking about, that would be great. And we'll just, as I said before, try and do these more often, because it's not too difficult to put them on. If anybody wants to be a panelist or a contributor, then please put your names forward, and we'll look forward to the next one. So thank you very much to everyone.